Okay, I'm going to do some little demonstrations. These are little tricks that we can play with. So I'm going to, I'll do a couple of things. Just watching Georgie play with her planets, I was going to demonstrate this idea that we can have this circle orbit go around the actual SVS logo. So all I've done here is if I go in, it's trying to get a right artificial three-dimensional rotation. It's a little tricky, but I've just sort of gone in and played around with the paths and trying to get the look about right. But all I want is for this orb to go behind that SBS logo. Now, I could do it if I played around with 3 dimensions, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do something very, very simple. So what I'll do is, so that's all good. But it's going to be around this point that we want the circle to be behind the SVS layer. So what we can do is we can come up and we can split the layer. So this is actually just cutting it into 2. So then what I'll do is I'll just drag that layer underneath. So I can bring it back out. I mean, as long as we do it. So I'll come in here. There. Okay, at this point, I'll bring it back up. And so on and so on. Okay, and so just being able to split layers. So just a, we've got to bring it back up in front. So that's just a little handy thing. Unfortunately, with layers, we can't actually put all of these on each other. I could do it this, the split layer is one way of doing it. The other way I could do it is I could actually have 2 layers above and below and just change the opacity from 0 to 100 and 100 to 0 so that we see it that way. So there's a few ways of doing it, but it's that artificial thing there. Okay, and so just being able to play around with things that way. Okay. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to make this square into a cube. And I'm going to have that cube rotate in 3 dimensions. Okay, and so there's a few things I need to actually do. With this cube, I'll make it so that there's no side, so we can actually see through the cube from a particular angle. So to actually make this, what I need to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I've just called this one front. But before I actually do the duplication, what I'll do is I'll move the anchor point down to the bottom. Because when I duplicate it, I'm going to rotate in 3D that front to become the bottom. Okay, and so let's just get our anchor point tool. I'll zoom right in. And let's just move that down to the bottom. just remembering a lot of what we do with graphic design is by eye. We don't have to be fully exact because there's no consequences other than the way that it looks. It's not like we're building something like an actual object that needs to be joined. Okay, so here we go. We've got the front. So I'll just duplicate that layer. So I've got two. Let's just hit the return key. I'll just call this the bottom. Okay. Oh, what I could have done in this first band, I'm going to turn these into 3D layers. Okay, so hitting that little cube. Okay. In the first band. Yeah. Now, to actually see this rotation, I need to actually see this view, the shape from another angle. I want to actually see it from the side or see it from the top. So I'll come into my views and I'll say two views. And here I'm looking at this from the top. Okay, so the actual square has no depth whatsoever. Okay. And so what I'll do is I'm going to rotate this. So I'll just tap my R key and having a look at our cube, understanding the axes that go through it. So just holding this box, the x-axis goes horizontally through this shape. The y-axis goes vertically and the z-axis goes through it. Okay, so I want this to turn on the x-axis. So having turned it into a three-dimensional object, I now have an X, Y, and a Z rotation. So what I'll do is I'll just turn this into 90 degrees. So it's done that. Now, if I made this minus 90, it's gone back the other way. Okay, so just understand that there's a minus and a plus rotation. So let's just, I might just come in and change the color of this shape so we can see it from some different angles when I actually start rotating. So I've got the front, which I might look at this from the side now. So I'll just say from the right. Okay. And so the front, I'll duplicate, Command D, just call it the back. And I'm just going to move this to the other end of the bottom square. So I just get my position and X, Y, Z. So I'm actually moving it. Now, I can zoom right in. Okay, it's not too bad. And so that's the back. Okay, let's change the color of that one. And we'll duplicate the bottom to become the top. Okay. And so what I'll do is I'll quite simply just move it. I can just use my, oops, not my anchor point. I've got my anchor point tool selected. I shouldn't really be using that. So I'll just move that up to the top. Okay, I can zoom in Again, it's not a major thing that it exactly lines up, but we don't want too many gaps to appear. So let's just quickly change the colour of that one. All right. So what we have is we have a four-sided cube. So again, I won't worry about having the sides on it so we can look through it. Okay, and so in all of these, so these are called orthographic views, or in an architect's plan, they'd be called an elevation. It's a flat view. Okay, there's no perspective on it whatsoever. So I can do this. I can bring a camera into this, which I might do in a little while. Okay, we'll talk about that. So I'll just come back and I'll just come back to one view again. Now, what I want is this, what I need to do is I need to actually bring the anchor points into the center. Actually, I probably don't need to because I'm going to be rotating a different shape. So I'm going to introduce a new layer. And this is called a null object. So a null object is an object that exists, but you do not see. You don't actually see it. And what I'll do is I'm going to link or parent the actual other layers to the null object. And so whatever the null object does, the other layers will do it. Okay? So I'll do that. Now, I've put this square, I aligned it center, so it's exactly in the center of the comp, just for this exercise. I'll do the same with the null object. And okay, so let's have a look at this null object from a different angle. So we'll look at it from the top. Okay, so I actually want this to be in the middle, in the exact center of this shape. So what I'll do, just going to zoom in and just using a guide with the selected top shape. Let's just get the null object and we'll move it to the center. Okay, so I'll just get position. I better turn the null object into a 3D object as well. Let's get the position. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, not too bad. Oops, don't do that. The 960 should be exactly it. Okay, good enough. So here's our null object, okay? And it is in the center of our 4 planes, okay? So what I'll do is I'll parent these to the null object. So I've got my little pick whip. I had all the layers selected. And so these are all parented to the null object. Okay. So let's just see what happens now. Let's just go back to one view. Now I'll just rotate this null object. I'll rotate it with the Y orientation. Whoop, I'm looking at it from the top, aren't I? Let's look at it from the front. Okay. It's because the null object is rotating. So let's just say I want this, I'll get all of these going, and let's just say that I'll rotate these twice. So we'll go 2, 2, 2. Okay, so let's just maybe I'll just do it 1 because it get a bit disconcerting. You get the idea. Oops, look at where we are. We don't want to do that. Okay, so all good. And so what I can do, let's just stagger things. So this can be type. It could be masked video. So I can build things in a 3-dimensional form. So this shape can have, as I said, it could be a video mask in there. And I could actually have 4, 6 video in that shape. I could have text built as a cube that is rotating. Okay, so with all of that, we've got our cube. Now, I will add one more thing just to introduce it. And what I'll do is I'm going to bring a camera into this. Now, this is a simulation of a camera. It's a simulation of a 35mm camera, okay, a standard film camera, okay, or even an SLR camera. So there's a couple of things to understand about this. If you've done photography, if you've changed lenses on a camera before, there's a couple of things that I'll say. So a 50mm lens is a flat lens on a 35mm camera. If I make it a lower number, it becomes a wide angle lens. If I make it a higher number, it becomes a telephoto lens. Okay, I'm just going to keep this flat. Now I can animate a camera moving in 3-dimensional space. It becomes very, very complex and very, very tangled. So I'm going to change the node. Again, I don't want to have to talk about this too much, but having done 3D modeling and a node can be placed on the camera. So that's an anchor point, like where it might rotate from. But I can have a second node, which is actually on the object itself, which is also, I can actually have the camera locked to an object as it rotates around. Now, there's a lot of testing and a lot of trial and error that will go with this. Just keep it a 1-node camera for this, okay? And so now, I can look at this from the camera's point of view. All right, so let's have a look at our view. So we'll look at this 2 views, and we'll look at this from the camera. and this from the top. Okay, there's the camera. And I'm moving the camera, which is moving it closer and further away from the object in three-dimensional space. Okay, so I'll just leave that there. Most of the stuff you do in graphic design is 2D and it only needs to be 2D, but we could theoretically have a wall with pictures on the wall and the camera zooming in and zooming out to different pictures on the wall, different folio pieces, like a fly-through. We could actually build a fly-through. We could build a three-dimensional environment. It's very complex, okay? But just with graphic design, we're essentially just working with a two-dimensional thing. But just to show you, okay? So there's this moving past. So let's just rotate this on the Y 90 degrees. And what we get is, rather than a flat orthographic view, we start to get a little bit of perspective in that shape. Okay. And I can zoom and fly through that cube. Okay. And I can turn the camera around because I can animate the camera. Now, believe me, this is a complex set of things to actually do. Experiment. If you've done 3D, if you've played around with Blender or even some of the game engine things where you actually build three-dimensional environments, you may have that part of your brain with a sensibility for 3D fly-throughs. But if you haven't, it is going to be a number of steps to actually understand and get your head around how this actually works. So just keep it simple, but by all means experiment with things and have and play around with 3D. But I think the main thing is that we can have the and build an object in 3D and have it rotate and present different elements that we're using. Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. Actually, just very, see if I can find it very quickly. Studio. What have we got? ID. Post it. I'll just save this. I'll just open up this very, very quickly. And this will explain, if it opens. Yeah, it's doing it. All right, I'll just hide that background. So what I have here is I built this in Illustrator as a reference, what we call an FPO, a full position only. So this is just showing me how I would build this. And so what I've done is, using that reference, which is here. So let's just replace the footage. We'll bring it up again. That's why it's good to know where things are. There it is. And so what I've got is I have, oh, got to get the right one. I've animated. I've got to make sure I've got the right. All right. So what's happening is the preview is building. This computer's processing is lagging. And so what I've got, I'll just try and do it. I've got all these little shapes moving in 3D to create that shape. So maybe I'll come back to it a bit later. But this is where you find the capabilities of your computer's processing engine. And these computers aren't particularly high-end with that. So you might find that they do tend to struggle. What I could do, just while it's doing that, is I can actually purge. I won't, not while it's doing it. This will clear all the cache. You can do it in Photoshop and you can do it in After Effects. Purge all memory and disk cache. So I'll have no more undos, but it will mean that I've cleared out the computer's cache, so it will run a lot leaner. So you might need to do that from time to time, especially if you're doing a lot of video. But anyway, so what we have are all these little squares like Post-it notes moving in three-dimensional space. But the camera is fixed and the shapes are moving past the camera, okay, from behind to the front, okay? So you can play around with these sorts of things, okay? So it's good to experiment. There we go.
Or just upscale?
Good question. Not necessarily, but it will depend upon the resolution of it in the. You'd have to experiment. So if I zoomed in on a video, I'm basically zooming in on the pixels.
Yeah.
As shapes, it might just be a bit of testing, but what you would do is you would build the shapes oversized and scale them down so that they are at correct resolution at the point where the camera's at its closest. Yeah. So you'd oversize your artboards in Illustrator or something like that. Okay, so it's little things to play around with that we can do. Let's just have a look at this from the top. Yeah, not as good. Why can't we see it? Anyway, let's not mess around too much. But there we go. Okay.